Everyone, I just want to say thank you for coming to our conversation on how to bulletproof your story when fact is a four-letter word with Yvonne Rolfshosen. I'm totally joking.
He's joking.
I'm joking. You're Steve Padilla.
I'm Steve Padilla.
I know that. I
Yes,
know
you
the
do.
voice on the other end of the phone.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, anyone who wasn't here in the last session, I'm Del Wilbur. I'm on the Board of Governors here, LA Times reporter here in the DC Bureau. I've worked closely on a couple stories with Steve Padilla, who is the West Coast preeminent writing coach.
Aww.
Edits our column one feature, basically the signature writing platform in the LA Times, and he's here to give you
book
some
form.
really great tips.
Yeah.
That was before the resurgence.
Yes.
Of
We'll explain this. Yeah.
And he's here to talk today about how to get out of the weeds and back on track. And I'm going to leave it now to Steve.
Okay. Thank you. No, I'm fine. Thank you. I see many faces of people who were there in the past hour. So thank you for coming back. By the way, even I can't listen to me for 2 hours. So I'm amazed. So when we like a story, when you hear this in the newsroom, you hear people complimenting folks on a story, and they say, "Oh man, I like that story. Real good story." And they tend to focus on the word craft. "Oh, I love that description. That was so clever." And you never really hear. Yeah. I'm sorry. Question? Oh, okay. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. And, okay, we'll project over there, too. And so what I was saying is, in the newsroom, when you hear people talking about, is that better? Sounds a little louder to me.
Why don't you talk from right here?
Okay. We do that. I can do that, because I don't use this anyway. Is it, okay, how about this? Do we like it this way better? Okay. We'll try it one more time. Oh, that was interesting. Ooh, there we are. Okay. Now, okay. So when we compliment writing, we tend to focus on the words. You never really hear anyone in the newsroom say, "Hey, nice structure." You never really hear that. We should. We should. We become students of structure. We should, because it's so important. And yet often, we all have this feeling, right? You've done your reporting, you've done your interviews, you've looked at your notes, and you've got all your material, you've reported the hell out of it, and like, what do I do now? And so what I want to share with you guys now is some basic principles of organization, principles of structure. And I'm calling them principles because we can't really call them rules, and we certainly cannot call them laws. That's the problem with structure. There's no one way to do it. And I'm going to give you some examples of stories that were structured in unusual ways, or how we let the facts guide us in how we structured them. So I hope that'll be really handy for you. And just to mention something that I did earlier, we do have a handout here that talks about some key elements in the talk I gave earlier today, as well as stuff we're going to chat about now, and with links to stories that I refer to. And there's even a recommended reading list, because people always ask me about that. Yeah, if you like.
I can help.
You can do that. It's actually given to the end, because if you give it to them now, you'll start reading. And I want you to listen. So, no, seriously, that's the way it works. So, okay. All right, so principles of organization. I think that generally we can organize a story around people, places, time element, or ideas. Sometimes all at once. And you've done this, like for people, you find that one, you're writing about, the hard work, the impossible task of being a high school counselor. And you find that one counselor, and you write about a week in the life of that one counselor. And that one counselor is kind of representative of school counselors all over, right? That one cop, that one, senator, that one whatever, right? And so it's a very effective technique. You've probably all done it. The only thing I would advise on that is, if you are going to focus on one person who stands in for others, cast your movie carefully. In other words, take your time. Now, again, if it's a daily, just grab whoever you can, right? I know. But if you are going to be focusing on that one counselor, that one cop, that one whatever, cast your movie carefully. Do a lot of reporting to find out who is the appropriate person to focus on. Two of my colleagues, Javed Kalim and Irfan Khan, did a terrific column one this year about Sikh truckers. Did you know that a lot of the truckers in America are Sikhs? That's kind of the industry that they dominate back in India. And so, and they've carried that tradition to the U.S., either immigrants or U.S. born. And Interstate 40 is kind of called the Punjabi Highway, because of all the cool Indian eateries on it. And so they spent months interviewing truckers, trying to find the right trucker to talk about, to profile in their story. And eventually when they did the piece, it was, I think, about 4 days on the road with this guy. They went from Southern California to Oklahoma and back, doing delivering a load. But so the actual reporting of it was fairly condensed, but the time involved to find the trucker went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So my advice to you, if you're going to do single on one person, be careful who you pick. Another thing, if you're going to focus on people, is you need to let the reader know what you're doing. Okay, and I'll explain it this way. I edited a story once about these two guys who were trying to save a building that was slated, that looked like it would get demolished. And they wanted to save it because it had these murals on it. And these two guys had a mutual love of art. They were friends, and they both were connected to this building. And they didn't want the building torn down. And their names are Ramiro and Paul. So I edited the story, and I offered up, this is years ago, and I offered it up to the column 1 editor at the time, and he found the story confusing. He found it confusing, and he said, which one is more important, Ramiro or Paul? And I said, well, I was kind of flummoxed by that. I said, well, they're equally important. And he said, oh, it's a buddy movie. And what's interesting was, it didn't read like a buddy movie. It read like a profile of Paul with these weird tangents about Ramiro. In other words, it looked like an unfocused profile because we basically didn't tell the reader, this is a story about two guys. I forget exactly how the reporter rephrased it, but all he did was fiddle around with the opening 4 or 5 graphs that essentially explained, to use the technical writing term, the gimmick, right? He explained that this is a story of two men. And once you understood that, when it bounced from person to person, you went with it. You follow me here? Does it make sense? And so I find if you are going to have an ensemble cast, let the reader know it's an ensemble cast. You figure out how to do it with your own words. But if you do that, it won't look like it's bouncing around. So it's sort of setting expectations. So another interesting thing about using a person as a guide in a story, this was really an interesting conundrum we faced. Reporter with me. Oh, my watch is back on that lectern. Would you get it for me, please? It's my LA Times 25-year watch, so we don't want to lose it. Yeah, I know. So anyway, where was I? Oh, so what was I saying? Oh, interesting thing about using a person as a structural device. We had a story about a predator priest, and it had a very interesting angle. Typically, when you read these stories, the angle is always, oh, the archdiocese knew and tried to hide it, right? I mean, we've read that story, unfortunately, many, many, many times. The angle that Ashley came up with here was very interesting. It was that many people had suspicions that something was screwy with this priest. A mom, a secretary, a fellow priest, but no one said anything. And it's not like they were trying to protect him. They just didn't believe this could be happening, They didn't add up, they didn't put 2 and 2 together. So that was the whole angle, this idea that sometimes these guys are able to continue doing the abuse because people just won't speak up. Not just that it's the archdiocese trying to hide things. I mean, there's all these, okay. So she wanted to make this a bit of a reader, but you have all these different characters, different incidents, different time periods, how to put it all together. Thank you. And I'm going to put that here so I can keep track of the time. And so what she did was she realized that the detective who got the confession from the priest was the through line, because she learned what Ashley did in her story. The detective learned that the mom suspected, that the secretary suspected, that all these different people, and so the detective appears periodically throughout the piece. Interestingly, she's not the protagonist. It's not a profile of the detective, but she is the glue, or maybe better description, she's the stepping stones. And so every now and then there'd be a phrase like, as the detective learned, or the detective talked to the mom, or whatever. We just dropped detective in there periodically, and that was enough to give the story more of a through line. So that's another technique you might try someday. You're thinking, how do I hold this together? You may have a character who, like I say, they're not the star of the show, but they're your jungle guide, and they're going to lead you through your story. So maybe that could be an effective focusing technique. Location. We've all done this one, and it's very effective. You know, there's the flood, and we talk about that one city affected by the flood. Or maybe we talk about the one street in the city affected by the flood. Or maybe we go to the one block, right? You know, I mean, the more you go focused, I think the better. And if you can just narrow things down, that can be very effective. Same with time element. You know, one day in the life, 1 month, with a murder squad, you know, 1 year in the life, that kind of thing. So that can also be a very effective way to structure stories. And by the way, I always hear people talk about, you know, long form narrative. How about short form narrative? You know, can we try that, please? One of my favorite narratives at the LA Times was written by a reporter that was, in terms of time, it unfolded in about 20 minutes. And it was a little under 500 words, I think, when it ran. And it's a narrative. And it's very sad. It's a horribly sad piece. And it's about the coffin of a soldier coming back from, I think it was Afghanistan. And the whole story is basically the family waiting at the airport. The plane comes up. Out comes the coffin with the honor guard. The family greets the coffin. The widow hugs it. And then eventually the family backs off. The coffin is put in the hearse and it drives away. And that's the entire narrative. And it just leaves you in tears. She just wrote the hell out of it. And also, just echoing something I said in the earlier session, there's not a single quote in that story either. It just captures that scene. So it's a narrative and it unfolds through time, but that time was only maybe 20 minutes. So just think, when you're doing narratives, they don't have to be 6-month extravaganzas, you know? So another thing about structure, where's my water? Another thing about structure is, since it is such a difficult thing, is pay attention to storytelling in general and steal structures. I mean steal in a nice way, of course. You know, look at how movies are put together. Look at how commercials are put together. I'm astounded by commercials and how they'll, you know, you ever see these commercials where there's maybe like 7 words of dialogue and yet like there's this whole thing that unfolds, you know? It's really incredible, very concise writing. And so we can learn by paying attention to other kinds of writing and other kinds of storytelling. One example I like to give is even folk songs. Folk songs I find fascinating in how they tell things. And one I always like to cite is one from Texas that you don't hear anymore, you know. Although the original version goes back to England, but the one I like is from Texas. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I spied a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing the whole thing. However, my next number will be Il mio tesoro from Don Giovanni. Okay. Now, look what happened here. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, where? As I walked out in Laredo one day, when? I spied a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen. Who? Wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. What? It's a lead. Second stanza is a nut graph. And if it's not a nut graph, I'll eat my hat. Quote, I see by your outfit that you are a cowboy. The cowboy then said as I boldly walked by, come sit down beside me and hear my sad story. I was shot in the breast and I know I must die. Now, notice what's going on here. It's basically catching our attention. It's not letting all the cat out of the bag. We know he's got shot, but we don't know why, and we don't know why he's going to die. So now we're hooked. And now what does that song do? Just like a lot of column ones and a lot of stories you read here at the Post, in the New York Times, and New Yorker, it uses God-given chronological order and goes back in time. 'Twas once in the saddle I used to go dashing. Once in the saddle I used to go gay. First to the dram house, then to the card house. Got shot in the breast, I'm dying today. Okay, so we know he was out whoring around, screwing around, and he, raising hell, and he gets shot. I always like to say, you know, that a police reporter did not write this song because the line would have been, I got shot in the torso, and I know I must die, because they just love that word, you know. Then the song continues. Get 6 jolly cowboys to carry my coffin. Get 6 pretty maidens to carry my pall. Put bunches of roses all over my coffin, roses to deaden the clods as they fall. Look at the verb action. Roses to deaden the clods as they fall. Then there's the death scene. Quote, go get me a cup of cold water to cool my parched lips, the cowboy then said. Before I returned, the spirit had left him and gone to its maker. The cowboy was dead. And then we got to have a funeral. We beat the drum slowly and played the fife lowly and bitterly wept as we bore him along. For we all loved our comrade, so brave, young, and handsome. We all loved the cowboy, although he'd done wrong. Notice how we keep adding more details. Now he's brave, he's young, he's handsome. Now, we're not saying he's, 6'2" with a square jaw, but, we're something, And that brings up something. This notion of adding more details as we go through. I've seen this so many times where writers agonize over the opening, and once they get that really wonderful and pretty and everything, then it's, okay, I've got him, now I'll just write. And then they kind of go onto autopilot. No, we need that same kind of passion and precision at the opening through the whole piece. And that's what the people who wrote this song did. And then the very ending, echo effect. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I spied a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. You've all read stories like that. You've all probably written stories like that. And the reason is it's a very natural way of telling a story, And what I love about this example is that the guys and gals who wrote Streets of Laredo, and I use the plural because it's the folk tradition, it gets built upon over years. They didn't have a city editor looking over their shoulder, say, hey, come on, tighten that up, And when are you going to file, No, they just knew this is how to tell a story. Oh, can I share something about filing editors, So one time when I was at the San Diego Union, my boss, his name's Steve, said, so when are you going to file? 5 minutes. He said, God damn it, Padilla, is that real minutes or dog minutes? Dog minutes. He would times everything I said by 7. So I love that, yeah. So, dog minutes, yeah. So now, we're going to switch gears here, and I want to give you some tools you can use when you've got, this all relates to structure, about how to untangle a tangled knot. Again, like I said earlier today, you've got that draft and you're going, something's wrong here, something's really wrong, but I can't figure it out. So here are a few methods you could use. One is sometimes the issue is the time element. Not always, but sometimes. So one thing I found is sometimes make a printout. You can do this on the screen too, but I prefer printouts because I can see the whole thing. Highlight all the dates, all the time elements, whether it's a date, or day of the week or year. And the first time I did that was years ago, a profile about a guy who, a formerly wealthy guy, he'd owned a car dealership and pissed away his fortune. And the editor of the piece asked me to look at it, and it was one of those things where the story was basically fine. We could have run it just like that. There was really nothing wrong with it. But Sam said, something's bothering me. And I read it, and I'm going, yeah, something's bothering me too. And I can't figure it out. And then I noticed there happen to be a lot of years mentioned. So I make a printout, I start circling my years. I really need visual aids. And then it hit me. The years were out of order. Okay, not that chronological order solves everything, but it solves a lot. Okay, but in this instance, things were very higgledy-piggledy, the years. And what was more astounding, there was one year circled more than any other. It was 1996 was the year. And it was here. And that was when this guy's fortunes really just went to hell in a handbasket. Because, did I mention the gambling addiction he had, and the divorce, and all these other things. So, but the power of 1996 was lost because it was all over the darn place. So when I showed Sam my printout, I was prepared to, pontificate the way I am with you, and he instantly got it. He's like, okay. He's like, get away, Steve, get away. And he what's interesting? He used basically the copy-paste key more than anything else. He just starts moving stuff around. Didn't require a rewrite. And all that 1996 stuff went into one place. And now a story that was just kind of, businessman runs into trouble, now becomes the crack up. And you can tell he's like going down, and then 96, and then it suddenly had drama. So sometimes isolating the time element can be an effective tool. Another thing you can do with printouts, color code. Color coding. I don't use this every day, but I have used it. Now, I'd use this when I have a story that feels disjointed and I can't figure out what's going on. And first time I did it was a story that involved 3 basic ideas. I'll spare you telling what they were, but 3 basic things. And I had pink, yellow, and orange. And I just highlighted those, just like a word or two in pink, yellow, or orange. And it was a long story. And so I had to go down to our cafeteria because I needed a big, long table. And I put them all out in order. stepped back, and I saw the problem instantly. And I had been reading this son of a gun for weeks, okay? And the reporter kept asking, Steve, what's going on? And I couldn't tell her, your story is awful, you know. I'm like, well, I'm busy, you know. And, you know, and okay, it felt disjointed, it looked disjointed. So we had the three colors, orange, pink, yellow, kind of mixed up in the first 2 pages. Okay, cool. And then pink would disappear for vast periods of time, or orange would disappear for long periods, or yellow. There were 2 pages in the middle that did not have any pink, orange, or yellow. What the hell were they doing there? Okay, that was, guess what the first cut was? You know. And one thing I thought was really interesting was near the end, yellow arguably would be the most powerful, most important color. Near the end of the piece, yellow kind of disappeared, and then in the last paragraph, yellow, a little bit of yellow, in a desperate attempt to bring it back, you know, to the beginning. So when I saw this, I thought, okay, well, I can solve this. Put some yellow over here, put some pink over there, spread the orange, you know. Not that the 3 had to appear on every single page. Okay, I'm not making this into like paint by the numbers here. But we lost the thread, and you could see that by the color coding. So it's a technique that I advocate. I worked with a terrific reporter from the Baltimore Sun on a crazy murder piece, Justin Fenton, I believe is his name. And he had me read this years ago, and his issue, there were so many characters, it was a multi-character piece. I ran out of colors, guys. You know, some people were in boxes, some were in circles, some were in triangular, squiggly lines. And when the color coding method for that revealed something very interesting to me. It revealed that there was one character who was mentioned too much. And there was another character who was not mentioned enough. We needed more blue and less green. And the reason we had so much green, by the way, this was really interesting. This is classic reporter. He got a transcript of an interview the cops did with this gangbanger. And it's just great stuff in this interview. So there's so and that was Mr. Green that I marked in green. And there was tons of this stuff. There was so much of the green at one point before I finished reading the whole piece, I thought, well, gosh, should he be the point of the story? You know, he's so compelling. He was actually a supporting cast member in this movie, but because we had the interview, and probably because he spent a lot of time getting the interview, you know, and getting the transcript, it becomes more important, right? It's the way it is. I love you reporters because you do that. You know? So anyway, color coding can be a very effective way to visualize what issues you've got going. Another big thing is 3x5 cards like these. What I find is this is kind of like storyboarding in movies. You know, you can type up an outline, right? And then you can move things around. But I find that laborious. And so what I love doing is just writing like a word or two on a card. And I just put it on my table. And if it looks screwy, I just start moving them up and down. And when the right order presents itself, I sort of see it. And then I stack them up in the right order and just do my piece. So, you know, everyone has their own way of visualizing things. But I find that storyboarding like that can be very, very effective. Questions? Otherwise, I got some cool hints for you.
You know what,
yeah. You got a question? Yeah.
You know what, Marish, your buddy Marish?
Oh, yeah, Jeff Maish.
Jeff Maish.
Jeff Maish.
And Jeff Maish and his color-coded system with his...
yeah.
That would be helpful to explain that to him.
I can't. It's so complicated. I can't even explain it. But I can send you to his to his Twitter feed. Terrific writer named Jeff Maish, and last name is M-A-Y-S-H. Jeff with a J-E-F-F. Terrific writer. He wrote, maybe you guys saw it last year, this incredible story about the McDonald's scandal, about the McDonald's Monopoly game scandal. You saw that piece? Wasn't that a hell of a piece? Yeah. Guess who the ghost editor was? Anyway, so anyway, he's a terrific writer. He sent out a tweet. So if you went to his Twitter feed, you can look this up, where he talked about. Oh yeah, it's so gosh. How do we show this? He has this method. I can't even describe it, but it involves not only like the equivalent of 3x5 cards, but colored in different ways to indicate different kinds of things. And he also conceives of his stories in 5-act or 3-act structures. And he storyboards it this way. And so anyway, he describes it in ways I can't. And maybe it's a little more formal than I could handle myself, but it's quite instructive, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It got tremendous reaction when he tweeted it out that day.
Well,
yeah.
That's because you retweeted it.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right. And okay, let's talk about narratives. There's 2 kinds of narratives. Because when I hear people say they want to write a narrative, my thought is, well, what kind? To me, there are 2 kinds of narratives. There's what I call the destination narrative, and the journey narrative. And these very much relate to your structure. And I'll explain what I mean here. The destination narrative that's the point of the story. You want to know how it turns out. You want to find the ending, the destination. If you read or listened to our podcast of a few years ago, Dirty John, or saw the HBO movie or the Bravo movie, you want to find out, how does it turn out? That's the destination. That's like, Huck Down the Mississippi. It's like most novels are done that way. Then there's the journey narrative, which is more typical in nonfiction writing and certainly newspapers, where we know the ending. Okay, we know the cop, caught the killer. We know the tornado hit the town. We know that the Texas Ranger got the serial killer to confess. That's what he wrote. That was even in the headline, right? I mean, the headline was something like, how he got him to confess, right? So the cat's out of the bag there. You know what I mean? But there's still tension, there's still drama, because we want to find out how we get there. So when you're considering what kind of story to structure, how your structure is going to be, I really encourage you to think about, okay, when do I let the cat out of the bag? I always wrestle with this when there's a death in a narrative. Do you let them know at the beginning that they're dead, or is that going to be a surprise? I mean, it depends on the story, right? But I really wrestle with that one, because I often don't want to give away that they're dead. But I really encourage you to think about these in this way. It goes back to what I was talking about the previous hour. What's the point? Is your story the destination, or is it the journey there? A little bit of overlap with the two, actually. But I really think if you think about stories that way, it'll really focus you. That brings me to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Nobel laureate, who was a journalist, and he really, it's interesting. He kind of he combines both, because he's very inverted pyramid. I mean, you don't know where the novels are headed, but on the other hand, he does let the cat out of the bag a little bit. The famous opening line of 100 Years of Solitude: many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aurelio Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. It's the famous opening line. Many years later, as they faced the firing squad, well, we kind of know what's going to happen to him, Well, we let that one out, Also, he, think about it. One of his novels, he lets the cat out of the bag in the title, Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Someone's going to die, But I really, really, really emphasize this. When you're going to conceive of a narrative, think which kind, and that will guide a lot of your decision making. One other thing about Garcia Marquez, by the way, let me look at my clock. Oh, good. There's an excellent Q&A he did with the Paris Review many years ago, where he talks about what he calls his journalistic techniques, or journalistic tricks, I think he calls them, that he uses in his fiction writing. And he talks about the whole idea of being very specific, the way we have to be in journalism, and how that would enhance his storytelling, particularly his brand of storytelling, magical realism, where all sorts of crazy stuff happens, like a priest drinks chocolate and levitates, And so he said, I love this, he said, if you write that elephants are flying in the sky, no one will believe you. If you write that 425 elephants are flying in the sky, people will believe you. Isn't that great? When I read that the first time, I immediately had this mental image of like those bombers over Europe in World War II. Those big just collections of bombers, And I love that. If you say elephants are flying in the sky, no one will believe you. If you say 425 elephants are flying in the sky, people will believe you. Oh man, I love that. Okay, questions? Over here. And she'll bring you the mic.
You mentioned earlier short form narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and what you think makes short form narratives so effective.
I think, well, it doesn't take as much time to read. I think that's one thing that goes for it. I think that you could zero in on one, that you could achieve more, let's say, intellectual and emotional depth by focusing on one event. I'll give you a very good example. There was this story we did while the protests were going on up in, was it North Dakota with the XL pipeline? And if you remember, there were all these Native American tribes from around the country were going to protest, as well as non-Native peoples who were going there to support them, if you recall. And so there was a group of veterans went to the protests to show their solidarity with the tribes. And this guy, Sandy Tolan, wrote a story that had this opening anecdote about how these soldiers, these veterans, belonged to units that had fought in the Indian Wars. You know, if you looked at the lineage of these military outfits. And they felt very guilty about this. And so what they did was they apologized to the Native Americans. They were, you know, in uniforms or remnants of their uniforms, and they gathered in front of the Indians and actually got on their knees and apologized. It's this incredible scene. And it was initially the opening anecdote of this piece about all these protests and stuff. And I said, I don't care about any of the other stuff. Let's make the whole story this one anecdote. So that's another option for anecdotal leads. If it's really that good, maybe that anecdote is the whole bleeping story, you know? And so that's what we did. And that was, so it wasn't, I forget how long it was, but it was, I hope this is answering your question, that you can find, and by doing that, he didn't dilute that scene. I mean, it had a really great power to it. And I guess there was a little bit of context because you had to remind people what this protest was and what the hell was going on. But it really was just the scene. And I remember the way he described the guys kneeling, you know, in front of them and asking for forgiveness. And then this elderly, you know, I think he was at the Sioux tribe, you know, guy, you know, putting his hand on the veteran's head and saying, you know, it's okay, it's okay. And so that's one way to do it. By the way, since so much of structure is dependent upon, you know, the story itself, you know, the facts will guide us. Let me just make an offer to you guys, because I've done this at a few other workshops, is if anyone is brave enough and wants to workshop a story, now you'll have to promise not to steal it. Okay, that's the only thing here. I've done this at conferences where someone has said, well, I'm working on a story about blah, 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 and we kind of just sort it out right there, live, you know. If anyone's brave enough to do that, we can do that. Yeah, yes. You want to go?
Let me try and make this very quick. In
All right.
1969, I bought a brand new 911T Porsche. I bought it in the factory, from the factory in Stuttgart. I came back to the United States, and a year later, the car was stolen.
Ooh.
End of story. In 2013, I was at a friend's home, and my cell phone rang, and a fellow said, hello, is this Francis Harden? Yes. My name is Peter Perry, and I have your car. Oh, I don't think so. My car is parked on the street. I'm looking at it. No, I have your 1969 911 blood orange Porsche. I said, oh.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Well, the story's not yet finished. I mean,
All right, yeah, okay, I'm hooked, though. Okay.
So Peter Perry insists that I come up to Albany sometime. And so one time I was in New York, so I went up to Albany, caught the train, went up to, and I arrive at the train station in Albany, and Peter and his father, whose name is Al, but he's also Peter Perry. So Peter pulls up in what he calls my car.
Yeah.
His father pulls up in a beautifully restored 1970 Porsche, and now, this was in October. Peter and I had been talking on the phone, exchanging emails, and he showed me how he restored the car and all this stuff all this time. Oh, wow. And so Peter's 45. I'm 77. Peter's father says to me, you know, Miss Harden, my son has kind of fallen in love with you. You should find somebody your own age. I said, I will thank you to know, Mr. Perry. I've been with the same man for 25 years, and he's perfectly age appropriate. It goes on from there. We are now in court. We're now in the New York State Supreme Court over the ownership of the car. I am the only person who has ever owned the car legally.
Ooh.
Everybody else has owned a stolen car. We do know that for many years the car was with a guy named Chester Van Giesbach. Van Giesbach is one of those old Dutch New York names. I haven't gotten him to talk to me. The second person to own the car was a fellow named Tom Ensign, like the Navy rank. Haven't got him to talk to me, but I have a pal in a police force.
Yeah.
One day I'm on my LinkedIn and I see that a member of the New York police force, let's just put it that way, is looking at my thing. So I call him up. And he said, oh. He said, you and your car are the talk of New York police enforcement from Canada, you know, to Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
I said, oh. So I have since met him. And so he has helped me along the way about, well, you should do this and you should do that because.
So do you want to write about this and what's your
Yes,
concern?
I do want to write about this. I had somebody from the New York Times that said this would be a perfect story for them, but then they destroyed their automotive section.
Oh, this is not a car story.
Well, it's, oh, well,
No, this is not. No, this is to me. This is not a car story. This is a story of memory, and maybe possessions and a little bit of car. To me, it's far deeper than a car story. Anyway, that's my.
I've got pictures too of me because I drove the car. I took driving lessons on the German Grand Prix circuit, the Nürburgring.
Yeah.
Got pictures of me there, and I have pictures from Peter as they restored the car beautifully. So anyway,
Okay, but here's the interesting thing.
Yes.
So, how does it end? Because it's still.
we don't know yet. We're in litigation.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, so do you write a story that has an unresolved ending, and does that leave the reader dissatisfied, or do you wait until it's resolved in court, and that could be years from now,
No, I think it's going to be in the next few months.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Then I would hold off. Then I would, okay, because I was thinking, how would we structure it, to run like right now?
No, I think
And
it's going
so
to be. I
I'd
think
wait
it should
for
be
it to
ended.
resolve.
Well, the New York State secession, I think,
Yeah.
ends in November. So
Yeah.
we've been to
have it.
court once and we lost because, it's a long. This is too much detail, but. I was told I needed to talk to a guy in Oregon. This is the New York Times go-to guy for stolen car issues, a guy named John Dranius.
Yeah.
He is the expert on what is called the law of Replevin. Replevin is who has, it means
love that.
the greatest claim to ownership. And so John has been trying to counsel my lawyer in New York, because I have to have a New York lawyer. And so the first court didn't even want to hear about Replevin because the guy the judge just wanted to clear his calendar. We are hoping that we get, somebody a little more intellectual, shall we say, on the court with the New
What's
York
very
State.
interesting about this is it's very Streets Laredo, actually. No, I'll tell you. Okay, I got a call, out of the blue, we have your thing. I spied a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen.
Yes.
And then back in time, 'twas once in the saddle I used to go dashing. 'Twas once in the in the saddle she used to go dashing. And then you take it through God-given chronological order, bring it up to the present, and here's the thing. Now I hope you get the car, but no matter how the court decides, the story works.
Well, see, I don't care in a way, I don't care if I get the car. If I got the car and I sold it, I already know that it would sell for $50,000, and I would give half to Peter because they put a lot of money in that car.
Yeah.
But,
And so I
I'm
think
more
that's
interested in
very-
the story than the car.
Yeah, I would tell it just the way you did. And like I say, it's very Streets Laredo. Yes, very column one. We should be talking about this. Yes, she had a comment here. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes,
just a
yeah.
follow-up question. Like, can she do like a series? Like, do we do that anymore in journalism?
do-
Like a
do what?
three-part series or a two-part series?
We do
like
series.
or what would you
The thing
recommend?
about a
Like-
series is you got to have cliffhangers.
right. So the story's
you know.
unresolved. So couldn't she like have
Well,
like
it depends
and
how
then
good a
re-enter the
cliffhanger.
courtroom? Like,
It depends.
Okay.
One time I edited a story, a series that was 7 parts, but each part was only like maybe 800 words, and so it was designed to be a real fast read. And it was really awesome. Yeah. But I think that's very interesting. Yeah. You had a comment.
Why is it not a crime story? How do you buy a car over and over again when the VIN number should tell you?
Well, I guess
something
the
is
crime
off?
would be in there too, but
I can respond about the VIN. So Peter Perry is an engineer, and so what I would call a very specific kind of guy. He likes detail. And so he was looking at the VIN, and the VIN in a car is on 3 different places. Usually it's under the dashboard, it's somewhere on the engine block, and it's one other place.
Yeah.
And so Peter noticed that the VIN, which has 2 8s in it, I could tell you the exact number if you wanted to know.
yeah.
And he noticed that one of the 8s had been chipped away, so it was sort of looked like a 6 on close glance. But the font is wrong. And so he looked elsewhere on the car, and sure enough, the VIN had been changed. Now, Peter and his father, their hobby, it's an expensive hobby, their hobby is restoring old German cars. When you have a VIN that's been altered, you have a stolen car, and you are obligated to report it. You are obligated to report it. So let me just finish
Yeah.
this point. So what happened then was, so all this is going on. I'd been up to Albany, and then I'm at a party. I used to be with CNN, and one of our producers was having a big birthday, so I go to her party, and I meet her sister, Debbie. Oh, Debbie lives in Albany. Oh, Debbie, I was just in Albany, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and since I came back, I wrote to the DMV, the commissioner of the Department of Motor Vehicles, and asked if they could give me a history of who'd owned the car. I said, I never heard from them. She said, oh, I'll fix that. She said, the deputy commissioner's a good friend of mine. Okay, fine. 3 weeks pass. Debbie sends me an email. She said, you will never guess what has happened. They have seized the car, and it's impounded. And not only that, they arrested Peter and charged him with possession of a stolen vehicle.
Oh, okay, she had a comment over here, or question. Yeah, I love it. Okay. Oh.
I want you to tell us what this story is about.
Well, interesting thing. I want to throw this out at you. First of all, I have a brief tangent here. This is a book called How Far Can a Piano Fly? And this is a collection of column ones. This was put out about 15 years ago or so. The title refers to a column one about these guys who built these immense catapults and, yeah, would like fly, fling, pianos and cars and washing machines through the air. So you can go to Amazon or our website and order it. And because you were so brave enough to share all that, you get this copy. Okay. Now, and you can all get your own. Okay. What's interesting here, this question of what is the story really about? That is the question we need to ask. One time, a reporter asked me to read a piece that was due next day with her boss. I wasn't her boss. And it was about Asperger's syndrome. And this was many years ago, before it was as well known as it is today. And it was perfectly fine. It had a lot about what the disorder is and theories about how to treat it, theories about what causes it. A lot of scientists in there. It actually had a couple, two people, Jerry and Mary are their names, and they both had Asperger's, and they had actually gotten married. And then it had the latest research and all this. And I read that story, and what jumped out at me was Jerry and Mary. And I told the reporter, I said, Kim, this is not a story about Asperger's. Kim, it's a love story. That's what I told her. She rewrote it, and this is the top. Precisely 28 weeks had passed since Jerry Newport had met Mary Manel. He had been waiting for this very moment to pop the question. 28, after all, is his favorite number. First, he said, it's a perfect number. The sum of its factors equals 28. 28 is also the sum of the integers from 1 to 7, and I'm 7 years older than she. Looking back at that April 1994 engagement, Jerry's obsession with numerical perfection is both amusing and disturbing. And for good reason, it is a gift that comes at a terrible cost. Jerry has Asperger's syndrome, a neurological disorder that isolates those who have it from other people, even while sometimes bestowing unusual gifts. Mary has it too. And while her gifts lie in art, she may be the only person who has ever fully appreciated his delight in numbers. Who else but Jerry could have found such significance in the landmark fig tree in West Los Angeles, where Mary had wanted the magic moment to occur? The tree, you see, just happens to be 119 years old. If you divide 7 into the age of the tree, he said, you get 17, and that's one of the numbers you can make a polygon out of a circle. But if you square 17, you get 289, and we met on the 289th day of the year. Clearly, this couple's love story, involving everything from an exorcism and an obsession with whales to a compulsion to read license plates backwards for fun, is no ordinary romance. It is a story of triumph in the face of a potentially devastating but often unrecognized affliction. Kim, it's a love story. So I sometimes, sometimes, as Freud said, a cigar is just a cigar. Okay, you can overdo this kind of thing. But seriously, I find sometimes I'm asking people, what is this story really about? Is it a love story? Is it obsession? Is it forgiveness? What is this story fundamentally about? And I think that's what forces you to be more thorough in your reporting, and also moves you to just ask more questions and to really just think hard about what you've got. And that's how you reach, that's how you get depth. So what is the story? Kim, it's a love story. Also, let your facts guide you, and your facts can help you be creative. We had a story once about a guy, he was a Polish Jew who never was actually put into the camps, although family members were. And he was able to evade the camps because he was able to get false identity papers. And he changed his name like 4 times. And it was very hard to keep things straight in the story. So finally what we did was, well, let's just go with the flow. So the beginning tells you his name is Solomon Berger, and he was from like Krakow. And then there was a subhead, and it said Jan Janowitz, 1939-1942. That was his first fake name. And in that chapter, he's Jan. And then he falls in with the Soviet Army. And then it said Ivan, Romanov or whatever, 1942, 1945. And in that chapter, he's Ivan. And then after the war, he became Shlomo Harari, for like a year, and a Greek Jew. That was his identity. And in that section, he was Shlomo. And then in the final chapter, he just went from Solomon to just Saul, and he lives in Los Angeles. And he became Saul. And so in each one of those chapters, we just kept changing the guy's name. you know? And it actually made it easier to follow, by the way, to do that. Conversely, one of the writers of the paper, Tom Kerwin, did an incredibly gutsy thing with a name. He did a story, I think it was also a column one, which is our showcase for writing on the front page. And it was a profile of a man who was an expert in death and dying. He studied suicide and cultural practices concerning death. And now the guy was terminally ill and facing his own death. And a powerful story. And I read the story, and I'm really moved. And I look at the photo on the jump, and I see the guy's name in the cut line. And I go, that was his name? It kind of really jumped out at me when I saw it in the cut line. I didn't remember that being his name. And then I start looking at the story, and I can't find his name anywhere. His name appears in the story once, only once. And I think it's maybe in the second or third paragraph. After that, it's he, him, his. And I asked Tom, I said, first of all, I said, am I losing my mind, or is he only named once? And two, you did that to make him every man because it is death, and we will all die. And he said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. I saw, you know. So. Anyway, that's creative as hell, right? And he's letting the facts guide him. So, you know, the inverted pyramid is a thing of beauty, right? You know, but try stuff, guys. You know, and if it doesn't work, try something else. Okay, more questions. We're gonna run out of time here. More questions. Here we go. Go this way. She's got a microphone for you. Here.
Thank you so much. This was great, as was your last session. But one of your first points was about finding a person to stand in for others.
Yeah.
And you said, you know, cast well. And I was wondering, in your example about the Sikh truck drivers and looking, what actually determines who makes that good character? Is it someone who sort of is representative of the group, or someone who has an especially interesting story? So it should be someone who stands out, or someone who's much more universal?
I think all the above, actually. And for that instance, I think it was both. Someone who was representative of the group, but also, frankly, was a real talker. I mean, they needed someone who really was willing to open up and talk about his family and stuff. They also needed a guy who would really be willing to agree to let him get in the cab and drive across the country with him. So in that instance, it was both. And he had a very interesting through line. He was very eloquent. He let us in, and access was the issue too. You know, we had photos and anecdotes of them at the house getting ready to do his trucking trips, as well as being on the road. So it was, in that instance, it was all of the above. Another question right here.
Thank you so much. And just a quick note, sorry for the noise earlier, bled in from the other session. But I wanted to ask, so I'm a daily reporter. I do a lot of policy-based stuff. I find it super interesting, but it is a little dry. This regulation dropped, this lawmaker says this.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, for these kinds of stories, how do you think a narrative can play a part in them? Because often I don't have a cast of colorful characters, and even if I did, I don't have time to develop them. I've got 3 hours to put this thing out. So how do you sort of see, I mean, or is this a place where a narrative can come in? And if so, how would you do that?
Okay, well, I guess my first thought is, yes, it could, but maybe it doesn't have to be daily. Okay, maybe you write the as we say, with the straight news story that day to get on the news, and the narrative is the weekender. You know, that you'd have more time to mess with. And maybe it's not even that weekend. Maybe it runs in 2 weeks because you want to, you know, the Wall Street Journal has a particular genius for this. All those headlines that begin with the word how, you know, how GE, blah, 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 you know, how Congress, blah, blah, blah. And they actually give you a tale often. And a lot of us do that. Actually, you know, a lot of news organizations do that more and more. So first of all, I wouldn't necessarily worry about doing on a daily basis. I would just do the straight news and then maybe come back, if that would be one way to think of it. I would also think of the steps in the process, you know, and are there twists, are there turns? And maybe not every story is conducive to this. You know, maybe some just, they don't work. But maybe there is something, if there's a lead character, if there's maybe one lawmaker, one bureaucrat, one activist who really pushed this thing through. Many years ago, gosh, this is like 30 some odd years ago, there was that book called The Dance of Legislation. Anyone remember that? From DC. It's called The Dance of Legislation, and it talks about certain bill becoming law, and it's dramatic as hell. I can't even remember what the law is now. So I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but I would think, could I center it on a particular person? Could they carry the water for you? You know, what would be the time element for it? and maybe some aren't appropriate for it. But I wouldn't worry about that on a daily basis. And there's another question over question in the back. Okay, yeah.
Early on,
Mm-hmm.
in talking about structure, actually in the other session, you referred to something that maybe a lot of people know about, but I don't, and you called it the nut graph. Could you talk about the nut graph and what that is and in how it affects structure?
Sure. The nut graph is, I think the simplest definition is it's that one paragraph that kind of says, okay, what's this all about? You have an anecdote that maybe has some sort of dramatic theme or dramatic scene, and you're kind of pulled in by that. But something that sort of sets the stage, explains sort of who are the stakeholders, explains what's to come. It's very much a scene setter kind of paragraph, and it's known as the nut graph. Not that, although, you don't have to have one. I mean, if people understand what your story's about, you don't necessarily need that device. It's a bit of a crutch in some ways, but that's what it refers to. We're out of time. Then I'm sum up. I need to give you a challenge. 3 challenges. First challenge is, I should have said this for those in the previous session. I dare you, write a feature story in your own, end a feature story in your voice, and without a quote, no quote ending. Second challenge is when you think your story's done, cut 30 words, just to prove you can. Not 100, not 50, just 30 words. It's the Steve Padilla 30-word challenge. Okay? I did it doing a freelance piece last year. I was getting paid $1 a word, and it cost me 30 bucks. Okay, so just let you know. And then the other challenge is get yourself a writing buddy. Everybody needs a writing buddy, and what that I mean is you need someone who'll send you an email saying, "Did you see this story? Did you see this description? Did you see this word they used?" I have writing buddies. I probably have too many writing buddies, to tell you the truth. Someone that and it doesn't have to be your boss. It doesn't have to be an old professor. It could be just a colleague, anybody. But someone you can talk writing with. Once a month, Baxter Holmes, who writes for ESPN, Nathan Fenno, who writes sports for us, and I try to get together, and it's not lectures from Steve. We just get together and talk story. And it's eye to eye, eye to eye. And Jeff Maish, the guy I mentioned earlier, joined us the other day, and the 4 of us got together and talked. We should have videotaped it. We could charge people for what we were saying. It was such great fun. So anyway, my hope is that. Let me know, by the way, keep the conversation going. If you follow me on Twitter, I only tweet about writing. I don't tweet about my cat. I should. He's magnificent. But his name is Wyatt. But I just tweet about writing. So let me know if you try any of these techniques I mentioned earlier or today, if they work. And what I'm really hoping is someday you're going to write an awesome story and you're going to have a colleague come up and say, "Great structure." So anyway, thank you guys.
Steve, we just want to say thank you for coming. Thanks for bringing so much energy to this. We all got a lot out of it.
Thank you.
It was incredible. Thanks to the Institute for sponsoring this great day. We learned so much. It was awesome. Just a reminder, at 5 o'clock right now, you can come up to the Cosgrove Lounge, have a drink with Steve if you want to pester him with some of your ideas, or we want to continue the conversation about stolen cars. And your tickets for this event get you access to the authors, the book fair. And so you can go talk to your favorite authors after that. I don't think that starts till 5:30, but don't hold me to that. It's Bain Ballroom, but you got access to that. And if you have any other questions, I'll be here for a few minutes. Hope to see you at the reception. Have a great evening, great weekend. Thanks for coming.